I'm here.
Shelley Tomczyk.
If there's no objection, the minutes are approved. Public comment, public comment, public comment. Anybody here from the public? Nobody here from the public? County Administrator Ken Witt for the financial report, and after that, the review of the department budgets for 2022.
I'll come up here so I can be a little more animated when we get to the budget part. On the financial report, I don't think there's anything in particular that I needed to highlight. We're through the July on the financial report, a little past mid-year. Everything's looking good, on target for the budget, other than some of the anomalies that we've talked about over the past months. Those continue, but overall, the bottom line of the budget is going to be just fine, projected out from where we are right now. But I would entertain any questions that you may have on the budget specifically.
Looks like no questions, Ken.
We'll scroll through that. So, budget discussion's not going to be quite as brief. So what we do is in September, we go to all the standing committees and we talk about their sections of the budget. This budget, though, in particular, 90% of my budget decisions are from your group. So this is where all the big decisions have to be made. So I really am looking for some input, because there's some tough decisions that are going to have to be made that are affecting the budgets of these people that are sitting in front of you. And some of them are going to be very angry with me at the end of the day. I can guarantee it. When we look at the budget, I have two main sources of revenue. We have sales tax and we have property tax. I know what those numbers are going to be for next year. We have about $1.1 million of new money to use. When we look at what the county board prioritized for me, they prioritize health insurance. So we didn't change the health insurance plan, resulted in a 5.62% increase. That'll cost about $550,000. Employee compensation was the second thing. So I have budgeted a step increase for all the employees. That'll cost us $700,000. So I've spent all the new money. Third item on the list was new positions. There were 15 requests for new positions totaling just over $1 million. And a lot of them were from here. So we have the medical examiner that requested a half FTE. We have justice services, which is a bigger issue. But they requested a new position, but they really need several new positions because they've ended up taking over the whole DRC. Child support's requested a half position. Clerk of courts requested 2 positions. The district attorneys requested a position, and the sheriff's office was requested 2 positions. So cross all of them off the board. So I've already spent all the new money that we have. So that's not even why they're mad at me yet. So when we get to operating expenses, we need to adjust for some of those. We'll get through those. Some of them you just don't have any control over, and you'll deal with them. When everyone submitted their budget requests, though, we were $1.8 million over budget. So if I cut the $1 million off of new positions, eliminate all the new positions that were requested, I'm still $800,000 off. And that doesn't account for the replacement of the DRC staff from the sheriff's office. So the only way that I know of to do that is to eliminate positions out of the sheriff's department to create civilian positions in the DRC. So that's a huge deal. But there's only one way to balance the budget, and that's give and take. So if you're going to go up somewhere else, it has to come down somewhere else. So that's a big decision that has to be made in this budget. The other thing that's not really reflected in here is with the sheriff's department and union contract. So that contract is up at the end of the year, and we're negotiating through that. And it's a tough negotiation. If you look at other counties in Wisconsin comparable to us in this area, we compare really well with those counties. If you go across the river and compare to Minnesota, they pay a lot more across the river. We see that with every position, though. So I'm not really looking across the river as much as they are. But if you look locally here, we're pretty comparable to the city of Hudson for compensation currently. But supposedly the city of Hudson is increasing their police department by 16%. So our union is expecting something in the same lines. So if we increase by that much, I have more cuts to make. I could eliminate the entire DRC, and I could afford the union contract increase. But it's all about gives and takes. So that's what we're going to talk about as we go through this budget. I'll pause as we hit each budget, but these are the bigger issues that we're looking at. These aren't small issues, these are big issues, big impacts, big ramifications of how public safety is going to be addressed in St. Croix County. Do you have any questions on that introduction?
Just one, Ken, when you mentioned the 16% for Hudson, was that a percentage increase over several years?
Yeah, it's over a 4-year period. So really though, you know, when you look at what you're making here, if they're gonna go up 16% and we're not keeping pace with that, I mean, they're gonna pass us up, they're gonna exceed us. You'll see preferential placement with the Hudson PD over the Sheriff's Department, where we already have a strong demand for placement of sheriff's deputies. So you're gonna make us less competitive within the local market if you're not staying competitive with that.
And just I know you're about to get into your presentation, and maybe I'm getting ahead of you, but would it be appropriate to talk any of those details of your negotiations now, or do you want to not talk about those as you're engaging in those discussions?
Yeah, I don't think we need to get into the details of it. I've painted the big picture for you. And we go back and forth, and I wake up in the middle of the night and I write things on sticky notes. So I had a new idea last night. That's the next idea I'm gonna talk to the union about. But it's a matter of finding a resolution, but it's also a matter of me understanding what your priorities are. So if I know that that's a priority for you, I will make changes elsewhere in the budget. So without telling me or getting into the details of what percentage we're offering back and forth, I have to know where the priority is.
And just one more quick question before you begin. Process-wise, you'll be making the macro presentation to the county board on 9 September of the overall budget.
No, not in September. So in October, we'll have a committee of the whole where we'll go over the budget in detail at that point. But at that point, I'm going to be presenting you with a balanced budget. So so the way it's working is in August, I sit down with all the department heads and I hear all of their feedback and I understand the problem, the issues that we have. And then in September, I come and I talk to all of the committees. And this is where I get some input from the elected officials at this point, explaining to you where the issues are, getting some idea of where your preferences are, what is the priority. I make the cuts then in September and present that as a balanced plan to you in October, and then you will vote on it in November.
I didn't ask my question very elegantly. If you answered it very precisely, you were correct. What I was thinking was that we will meet next as a board on 9 September, and we'll have the opportunity to discuss these big issues with our colleagues. It's either informally or formally at that time to some degree as we proceed, I believe. And then, because you're going to throw a lot at us this morning, I'm not so sure we're in a position to give you absolute guidance this morning, but we could also have a special meeting of this committee prior to the time you go final in late September if it was felt necessary. Is that correct, basically?
Yep, absolutely. You can call a special meeting. There probably won't be a lot of discussion at the 9 September meeting unless there's something specifically listed on the agenda for a discussion. Okay. All right, so the first budget is the circuit court budget. So when we look at this budget, the first thing when we're looking at budgets, I always point out is this very first top line. So this is the amount of the property taxes. So this is the tax levy support. This is how much money we need to get from the taxpayers in order to support this department. They generate other revenues. They have a lot of expenses. This is the balancing number. That's how we balance the budget to zero. So when you look at this, circuit court looks like they've done a great job because it's dropped by over $100,000. We've transferred some of that money out So I know the judges are all excellent and great, obviously, but we did transfer this money out. The treatment court was previously in this budget. It has been moved to the Justice Services budget. So when you see the hundreds and hundreds of thousands that Justice Services is up, there's part of an explanation. Some of those monies have been transferred from other sections. That's what's happened in this section here. I don't believe there's anything else of significance within their budget that we need to point out. So we'll move on to the next one. So Justice Services. So Justice Services was previously the CJCC. When you see the previous numbers, those were the operations of the CJCC. So now you see the amount of tax levy needed is up to almost $600,000. That wasn't the cut that we saw from treatment court coming out of circuit court. This is a lot more than that. So this is also encompassing the day report center. So we need to staff the day report center in order to continue to operate that. It was previously operated by the Sheriff's Department with deputies from the jail. It's now going to be operated with civilian positions. So those positions have been added into this budget, and that's driving up that general property tax. So that is first on the list, DRC, what we're doing with that. And you can see hundreds of thousands of dollars of increase there. And it's distributed amongst a number of different ways, but that's one of the bigger drivers in here. The rest of it is what CJCC did, what the treatment court did, really without a lot of structural changes to that. This is primarily driving, the DRC is primarily driving the increase here. When we get to clerk of courts, so our clerk of court made a very impassioned request for 2 additional positions within the clerk of courts. You can see the impact. It's going from just under $800,000 to over $1 million of tax levy support. A position runs anywhere from $80,000 to $100,000, really depending on the level of the position. I budget every vacant position with a family plan. A family plan is over $20,000, and then you add in the other costs. And that's what drives those costs. So there's 2 positions added into this budget. A couple of the other changes, legal services, court-appointed counsel, these are costs that are driven by service demand. As demand of services rises, these costs are rising. So they don't have a lot of control over what these are. These are going to be what they are. We really look at the trend line to make a determination of where we should budget for these types of expenses, but they are going up. So I'll pause there on clerk of courts. So clerk of courts, 2 position requests, and I don't know if you wanted to add anything additional on those position requests, Christy?
My reasoning why I requested 2. One position is going to be a clerking position for the court commissioners. We have 4 judges that have dedicated clerks for each of them. In addition to their full-time clerking responsibilities, they also do what we call divisional work. They have secondary and sometimes tertiary responsibilities in different divisions, whether it be criminal, traffic, civil, small claims, family. All of our courtroom clerks who are dedicated to their judges also have additional duties that they do. The court commissioners' calendars have been steadily increasing for many reasons. A lot of hearings that were previously on judges' calendars have been moved to the commissioners' calendars. And we do not have a dedicated person to clerk for full-time for the commissioners. So we are pulling people from inside the office that have divisional, who their main function is divisional work. So it's mostly been our civil team, our family division, small claims division, and civil division that have been clerking for the commissioners. That is getting to be very problematic as far as coverage and them being able to do the responsibilities of their desk work, divisional work, as well as clerking nearly full-time with the commissioners. So that's one position that we're looking to add. The second position is in our criminal division. Right now, 3 of the 4 judges' clerks are in charge, also do criminal work. And as the criminal caseloads continue to increase, which is why the DA's office is asking for an additional position, those numbers have been increasing quite a bit. We're finding that we're not having enough time to do our due diligence, get our processing done in the statutory timelines that are required. You know, we need to get our judgments of conviction done timely. We need to get our warrants quashed timely. We need, you know, time to dispose of cases. And we're just not having time to do that with our at our current staffing level. So if you have other questions, I'll be happy to answer.
All right, so have we, I guess we should look at all the staffing that you filled in the requests and then ask the questions?
Sure.
Make value judgments based on all of them before we start asking about any of them?
Yep, that's fine, and I'll go through all of the budgets and we'll come back, and if you can say, you know, this really jumped out at me, this seemed to be, you know, the most important thing to me, Ken, I can use that information then as I'm building the budget and the decisions that have to be made.
All right,
So,
thank you.
yep. All right, so we'll go to the medical examiner. The medical examiner, you can see that there's about a $40,000 increase. That's the half-time FTE that's being added, or requested to be added into the medical examiner's budget. Again, as the medical examiner sees increasing cases, they're asking for additional support staff to cover that. Go ahead, Patty.
So as I look at our department, we are seeing such a huge increase in unexpected natural and unnatural deaths. And with that comes a lot of follow-up work. And that's where the help of Marcy is so important. We have seen such an increase. We're looking at 12% again over last year. And it's just a lot of work that we need administrative staff. We've never had a full-time administrative staff to help us with all the document gathering and all that information gathering, but that's what makes our office unique to a lot of the other offices, is that, you know, we need administrative help, and we've never had it before. We have a half-time. We're very appreciative of that, but our activity only continues to grow. We're, you know, we operate with the same amount of investigators that we've had for years, and this administrative help is critical. For example, yesterday we had a unexpected death. By time we're done with the case, we will be requesting information and then going through the information from 5 different agencies in 2 different states. So it's gathering that information so that we can do a thorough job in our department. So that administrative help, and really just that administrative assistant, program coordinator with hospice and everything, is so important for us to be able to get our work done in a timely manner. We're working really hard. We have a lot of deaths. We're looking at nearly 1,000 deaths this year, 1,000 cases that are running through our office. And as a matter of fact, when I leave here today, I'm going to a in-county law enforcement office to gather up some bones to start a new case on bones that were found inside of a construction site. So we have to, there's a whole process that goes with that, and it's these seamless activities that we do in gathering information that helps us. And I'm not saying our department needs it more than any other department, but the expectations of the work that we need to do is so high that we need this half-time position. And I understand how hard this decision is going to be for you. So that's all I got.
Thank you, Patty. Next is the district attorney's office. You can see the district attorney's office is up by about $140,000. They have a new position requested in there for a legal secretary to help with the caseload that they have. Other than that, there were no other significant changes. That's the main driving change within their budget. Child support, you see a negative number. They actually generate more revenue, much to our corporation counsel's dismay. They charge some of corporation counsel's time, and they receive the revenue for that. So lucky Lisa. You can see that there's a small change in that, and that's really the difference between the part-time position that they want to go to full-time. They do recoup 2/3 of their cost back as revenues. So really, this position request, and I think it's already at a 0.6 or 0.63. So going to a full-time position, the cost is under $10,000 on that request because of the 2/3 funding source. That's the only significant change within child support. Law enforcement. So law enforcement is broken up into several different sections. The sheriff has responsibility for patrol, and building security would be within this law enforcement cost center also. And then corrections, which is a different cost center, so the jail is separate. And then we have emergency services with telecommunications and emergency management. So when we look at the 2110 cost center, this law enforcement, this is patrol and building court security. So that's what's in here. So when we look at this, we're looking at a tax levy increase from 7.7 million to 8.2 million. So included in that is a request for 2 additional positions. So the sheriff had wanted additional highway or not highway, county patrol, and it's been a number of years, well over a decade. I don't remember the exact year, Sheriff, but it's been a long time since we've added patrol deputies onto the road. So that's part of the cost that's driving it up. When we look at other costs within the department, there are some other operating type expenses going up. The software and subscriptions, there's a hefty increase there. That's that new software package that they have. And a few others that are up by $10,000, $20,000 that are contributing to that increase. But again, mostly related to labor. So labor with 2 positions in there, and then this also falls, half of it with the union contract. So in the union contract negotiations, I have a certain amount budgeted in here to account for it, but if you look at what Hudson's settling for, it's a lot more than what I budgeted for. So I need to know where the priorities are. Are we adding deputies? Are we increasing compensation for deputies? Or are we cutting deputies? So those are the types of decisions that have to be made on this. I don't know if you want to add any more about the 2 position request, Sheriff.
Thank you. As Administrator Witt said, over the years, as we look at a global sheriff's office, we have been the beneficiary of positions. They've been to the Day Report Center from 2015 on, as well as when we went to building security, we also added a court services position. So kind of the ancillary positions have been added to over the years. Now, obviously, with the Day Report Center and the shifting of some of those functions and priorities, that's probably going to diminish the way it looks, as well as some changes at the front door screening. Some of you have seen the 2 contracted positions. One used to be a deputy, one contracted. And actually, when we started, that was 1 deputy, 2 contracted, so we had 3 at the front. We then saw that was more of a, wasn't enough room and really wasn't needed. So we went to 1 and 1. And now we've, after a couple of years of reviewing as well, and knowing that we've gotten a couple good private security people that seem to do well at their positions and the staff like, we're going to scale back and still have 2 at the front, but 1 will not be a sheriff's deputy, though they will be still stopping in, monitoring, and overseeing that work. So as we kind of move some positions around, one of the constants has remained patrol division. And again, that has not been added to for 10, 12 years. I'm off the top of my head thinking 2008-ish. And of course, like every other division or agency, the workload hasn't diminished. The crisis calls have not diminished. The transports have not diminished. Traffic has not diminished. Hudson, for the last year and a half, has been where we are putting resources to assist the local agencies. When each local agency has a serious crime that involves reconstruction or, of that crime scene or of a fatal crash, we're always the ones to be called to go in with our staff and our investigators to assist. Not that they aren't capable, it's they don't have that manpower. So we get pulled in a lot of different directions. And we would really, as calls increase, sure like to give these guys some more assistance. Our proactive patrol is very diminished as the years go by. We have become a reactive patrol. So we really want to add some support for that staff out there.
For Ken, do you recall, or can you pull out of the air, as far as the amount of growth that we've had, where has the population landed in terms of within municipalities that have their own law enforcement, and then in the townships where they don't? In other words, how much capacity has the county required from the sheriff's department for law enforcement since 2008? What additional demand has been put on them from 2008 to 2021 that they, that marginal utility that's been required of them that we're not fulfilling?
Yeah. There's a couple parts to your question there. One, the growth of the county has been primarily on the west side of the county. And it's not just in the city of Hudson, it's in town of St. Joseph, town of Hudson, town of Troy. Those are all growing communities on our west side. So they don't have their own police departments. We do see growth then within the city centers, so River Falls and New Richmond have grown. But they do have their own police departments, so it's really not a matter of growth as driving that. It's a matter of the interworking relationship between the two agencies, and the sheriff would be better able to explain any change that has occurred over the last decade and a half over how much they support. I really wouldn't know the answer to that part of it.
I guess what I'm getting to is that you can't drive through Richmond Township or parts of Star Prairie Township or Somerset Township without seeing what I remember as corn and soybean fields now are housing developments, and Troy. And all of that is townships which don't have law enforcement that will rely on our sheriff's department and mutual aid, but places that, if you needed a sheriff, it was just you in a cornfield. Now it's a regular community. So I guess I see a real need here and understand what it is. Could you speak to the growth and the pressures that's putting on the department?
Yeah, I can't necessarily speak to the numbers of out in the county, but you're right. The amount of housing additions and commuter traffic, they're not working all in our local communities. It's to and from, so it's kind of a bedroom. So our burglaries, our thefts, are in these areas. Even as we take out New Richmond, Hudson, and Northern River Falls, Roberts, Baldwin, Hammond, Glenwood City, Woodville are all, for the most part, growing communities as well. And some of them, through best efforts, still don't have 24-hour coverage of law enforcement. And when they do have someone out, Baldwin, Roberts, Baldwin usually has two, but all of those areas as well have one. And When there's a domestic, we go and assist. When they're out on a transport, we take their calls. When there's nobody on, we take their calls. When they're in court, we could take their calls. So county, yes, has been growing, but Hammond's exploding. Baldwin's getting bigger. Woodville, Roberts, I mean, the truck stops that are coming in. There's a lot of growth that is also in those areas that we're also trying to supplant. Again, 722 square miles, no matter how we cover it, and 5 deputies out there, minimum of 4. When we have a crash, when you drive by and you see 3 or 4 squads, that's it. We ain't got nobody else. They're all there. So those are some of the things that, as that growth comes, so goes our resources.
So when I'm looking at this cost center of the budget, the 3 questions that I'm still wrestling with in my mind is the new positions that were requested for patrol. How do we settle a union contract and maintain a competitive wage rate? And is the sheriff department now overstaffed by one court services deputy because we switched to a contracted position there? We'd added that position about 3 years ago when we reduced one of the contractors. We've added a contractor back, so we overstaffed. Do I reduce the position from the sheriff's department now because of that? So those are the 3 questions that I'm talking about under this section.
Explain the last thing that you said, this
Yeah.
contracted versus,
And it probably relates when we get into corrections next, because they're intertwined a bit. But, so we were operating the front security with a deputy and with a contracted position. So if we back up, it used to be 2 contracted positions. We eliminated a contracted 3 years ago, added a court services deputy to the sheriff's department, and we're operating them with 1 and 1. So now we've gone back to 2 contracted, but we haven't eliminated the court services deputy. So the sheriff retained that position, but also went back, and we're spending money on contract costs now. So there's an increased cost on the budget because of that. When we talk about corrections next, some of the things that they were doing in the day report center, we've moved to upstairs, and court services is doing that. So that's a shift of where they were doing it with corrections deputies, they're now doing it with court services deputies. So I do see that position transferring its job from front security to fingerprinting and some of the other things that they do. I don't know all the details of what they do, but I know they're doing stuff upstairs, so that workload has shifted from corrections up to court services. But that position, that's one of the questions that I have as I'm trying to balance the budget is, was that enough of an offset? Did I now overstaff my court services because I added a contract? So those are the 3 questions in law enforcement. 2 deputies requested. How do I stay competitive with a union contract settlement? And that extra court services now because of the contract offset.
Judge Nordstrom.
With your permission, just one comment on the court services thing. I do appreciate, and the judges all appreciate, relocating the fingerprinting and the DNA services and mugshots to the room outside of the courts. It serves 2 purposes. It makes it easier to make sure people go do it, and we don't have to chase them down later to get the DNA, for example, after a conviction. But it also adds some comfort to the judges in having a court services deputy generally on the floor, because unlike a lot of counties, we don't have security in courtrooms unless we ask for it. Something happens, we're on our own until we press the big red button on the bench, and then lots of folks come. But so it's very helpful to us, and I don't know if that's a new person or the same person, but I just know that having somebody staffed in that room to serve the 4 judges and the 2 commissioners that have lots of issues that come up during the day is helpful. So I just wanted to give that context.
Very good. Thank you, Judge Nordstrand. All right, so the 2700 cost center is corrections. So this is the jail. When we look at the tax levy, so we went from 4 million to 4.3 million. So there was really very little decrease in here, even though we've transferred the services of the day report center that was being done from labor hours within this budget, the corrections budget. It's now being done in the justice services. So you saw justice services, which had been CJCC, jump from, 100,000 to almost 600,000. Well, that's a cost shift. So there wasn't a cost decrease here that, we would normally expect. So when I look at this budget, the first thing I look at is, well, we're adding 3 civilian positions into the day report center. So I cut 3 deputy positions from corrections. And I know that causes problems for the sheriff. He has scheduling issues, and the more positions I eliminate from him, the harder his scheduling becomes. So I understand the challenges, but again, there's a give and take in this budget. Anytime you want to give somewhere, it's got to be taken from somewhere else. I wanted to bring this up because I don't want to hit the county board floor in November, or even the committee of the whole in October, and be presenting this to you, and the first time you've heard that I've said I'm going to be eliminating 3 corrections positions. If that's something that is not palatable for the county board, I need to know it now rather than later.
Supervisor Hanson.
Are these 3 people working for justice support going to be, is it 3 FTEs? And are they going to be trained, cross-trained as corrections people? Will they be able to lend a hand if something goes haywire in the jail?
They will not be cross-trained for corrections. If you want, Susan can speak to what their duties and responsibilities would be.
And is that 3 FTEs so that we can serve people? My concern at our last meeting was that people who are involved with the day report center need to work a job and have flexible hours so that they can come in, and if they're required that a narrow window, they may be less likely to conform to the program.
So previously, the day report center was being run with 5 deputies. Up until last year, it was 5 deputies that ran it. That also included Huber, though. That also included the fingerprinting and mugshots and stuff like that. So when we try to break that apart and reconfigure it, 3 civilian positions is a minimum staffing level that I think we need. But that is not the same staffing level that 5 deputies were providing. It is still less hours under the civilian model than it was under the 5 deputy model. And the 5 deputy model still wasn't providing nearly the flexibility that the courts have been demanding for that.
Okay, so I guess I'd like somebody to describe for me how it works if somebody's on, if they're participating in the day reporting program, what their life is like, and if our program is going to set them up for success or failure, and how this amount of money that we're spending is going to impact the staff in the jail, the new staff in justice services, the court, and as important, the success or failure of the person that we're trying to help by having this program in the first place. Because if people aren't going to get a chance to succeed in life because of this program, then why are we spending money on it?
So maybe we can hear from Ms. Caparelli, and also if Supervisor Administrator would like to comment, that's fine.
I would say that's a work in progress. Obviously, the Sheriff's Department has been doing this for 5 years, 365, 24/7 hours, right? And right now, we're working with minimal staff, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. Our ultimate goal is to have several shifts for monitoring, not just monitoring, but response, where the courts have decreased their numbers for us to actually focus on the highest risk felony offenses, but those are also the highest amount of care. So while we can focus on this amount, ultimately our goal is to get enough staff so that we can have a true case management program for low, medium, and high risk. And that starts with assessment. So these are cross-training aspects that will come in the future. Staffing is the number one issue. It takes time to get qualified staff. We're filling a lot of holes. We're transitioning from a sheriff-led organization to a civilian-led organization. Our bond language has to change. Everything that we're doing has to change from what we've been in the past. Finally, as far as case management is concerned, we don't simply want to warrant an arrest. We want these folks to have success, right? So what can we do? Those lower risk folks, we don't have to manage them as much. But those upper, medium, and high-risk people, we absolutely need to connect them to human services. I'm already in conversation with Char Lopez and Bob Barrett. And, those are all aspects and goals of the future. Requires staff to connect, to case manage, to support. So those are our goals. We need people to do it.
So there has been some in the transition between the 5 full-time and the 3 full-time. There has been some transition of what the program entails. It's not like a recreation. What is the amount of people? So are we referring people for AODA assessments? Are we referring them for mental health services? Or is this looking like an extension of the DA's office where it's used for bond conditions and bail jumping charges? Can you express what services we're providing?
I don't think it's an extension necessarily of the DA's office, and maybe, Your Honor, you can kind of chime in a little bit, but I think it's a plan for the future. So if somebody is coming up on assessment and they have obviously issues on criminal offenses that relate to drugs and alcohol, obviously those are red flags, right? We want to, within the bond language that we establish with the report that my staff and the staff of the future send up to the court so that they have that information in front of them. That's the connecting point. But we have to get to the point where we're assessing folks early on in the process,
Okay.
So it's a work in progress. It's both. We're filling holes, but we're also planning for the future.
Judge?
So to give you some context here, we've recently done an analysis of who we're testing now. It'd be interesting to find out where are we at right now. So presently we're testing 24 defendants. And now I'm talking about in-person urinalysis testing, all right, sort of the gold standard of testing. There's other testing going on that's remote breath testing. There's a SCRAM bracelet that tests for alcohol use. It's on a sort of like a GPS monitor you put on your body. But the gold standard is the UA testing, and it's also the most people intensive. They have to actually come to the day report center and go through the process. So we have 24 total. There are actually 36 that are presently ordered to be tested, but the difference is they're in warrant status, so they're gone right now. They may come back. We may find them. Or they're in jail, and so then they're not subject to testing by the day report center. 1 time per week we have 15 people. 2 times per week we have 13 people. 3 times per week is 6, and 4 times per week we have 2. So that is the current status of the urinalysis type testing that high. Now, going to your question about what's the process? Obviously, when we had 140 people being tested back in May, we had a lot more people that were subject to bail jumping charges, and I think it's safe to say that, in the past, our available response to people who test positive, violate their bond for testing purposes, was largely, do they get charged or not with bail jumping? And then when they came to us on a bail jumping charge, we as judges would look for opportunities to direct them, and we had a stabilization group that we would send people to at the HHS, that I'm not sure that proved particularly valuable, but it was an option. And so we were trying to get people in a pretrial state into some treatment opportunity. I know HHS is working with Justice Services to try to figure out a case management model where people who test positive, you know, who we know now have got a problem, they can't listen to a judge's order not to use, right? And to get them directed into services. Understand, when we're only testing 25 people, the world of people that are going to be directed into services using that model is very small, because there is a certain amount of compliance, right? And so you're talking about a very small group of people that might be testing positive and need services, and as an alternative to a bail jump charge, for example. As we ramp it up, if we have greater capabilities, we will see more positive tests, and we will have greater opportunity. But understand, it seems to me that the direction towards treatment, and now sort of speaking as a treatment court judge here for a minute, the direction for treatment from a judicial point of view is really only two opportunities. We can do a risk assessment, an evaluation of their substance abuse needs at the time of arrest or somewhere in the pretrial process, and then that forms the basis for getting help. Or we can have a red flag show up in a positive test, and that forms the basis for getting help. If we don't have a level of testing that generates those people, all the other people that I used to put on testing, you know, the only way they're going to be redirected is through some kind of a risk assessment, you know, to sort of weed out who it is who needs help. The last thing I'll say is, you know, as I set bond now, today, I'm going to go up today and we'll have some folks come up at 1 o'clock. We have to determine what's an appropriate bond. I'm very hesitant these days to add testing because of the limited ability to do testing. But as I set bond, I don't really have much information available to me on who should I test or not. And I know that's a work in progress, but the reality is I don't have information. I have a public defender sitting there who might have met them for, you know, 15 minutes today in jail, and I have a district attorney who is charging them with a crime based upon a police report, and that's all the information we have unless they have another history with us. And so we have to sort out who to test and who not to test based on this information. So I'm a big advocate of having some kind of a pretrial assessment for substance abuse in the appropriate cases. But understand, that's going to require, for example, a defense attorney to agree to allow that. They may not. And so, you know, these are all challenges, and I just want to give you sort of a judge's point of view, and I think that all the judges would share this point of view, that we're looking for ways to avoid the bail jumping charges that generally are dismissed anyway, you know, it adds to time, and it adds to jail time, putting people in jail and out of jail. It adds to all kinds of costs. The DAs have to write up these charges. We have to deal with them. All these, they're added cases. It's not helpful in terms of the total outcome usually. But that's a long answer to your question, and I appreciate the chance to tell you what we thought.
As you heard the judge describe it, as we ramp up, so one area of the budget goes up, another area of the budget is going to have to come down. There isn't new money. I feel like I'm on the deck of the Titanic rearranging deck chairs right now, but there's only so much money to play with. So anytime you go up, something else comes down.
Quick question on money. I know you've gone through quite a process over the last 2 months with the department heads, and everybody's got demands from all over the county. We've heard about the hope for coordination between HHS and Justice Support Services. I know Judge Nordstrom reflected on how he is handling bonds. I know hopefully the other judges are being flexible as well, because if they're not, then the numbers continue to be large. We do have, but my question was going to be, can we be more creative, do you think, in any ways we're utilizing our capital improvements budget money or the ARPA monies. Even, I know we met about this about 6 weeks ago at the county board, and suggestions were made, but it seems like, could we be creative there? I know I've spoken with the folks at the Wisconsin Counties Association, and they reflect that there's a great deal of flexibility in the use of ARPA funds, for example. Very great use, particularly in the public safety protection area and economic development, much of which can also, public protection can be couched in economic development terms, because nobody wants to move to an unsafe county. So I just wonder if, as you're looking at what we've done and decisions we've made, but decisions we might be able to revisit, because everybody's made a very good case for why they need more people and what the harm to the county and our citizens are if we don't do it. But we have to find the money somewhere, and obviously one other option we don't want to talk about much is tax levy. But those seem to be the pockets of money. Other locations within the county, KIP monies, ARPA monies, tax levy. Is that generally where our options come down to?
Tax levy is not an option for you. So there is no more tax levy money that you can do. The state limits what we can do for that, and I've already maxed what we can do. So that's already accounted for. I already spent all that. So yes to ARPA, and we're looking at that, and that's probably going to supplement some of the ramp up that the judges are looking for. But you have to, that's a short-term money. I mean, those monies are only good for a couple of years. That's, putting duct tape over it. We still have to have a core piece of the day report center staffed, and we've analyzed that and determined that is 3 FTEs. So that's adding 3 FTEs that were not on our payroll last year. So to create those 3 FTEs, I'm going to have to cut somewhere else in the budget, and I've explained to you where I think that cut comes from, but I do understand the other ramifications that that has.
Supervisor Hanson.
Maybe these questions should be better in a committee, one of the other committees, the services committee, but perhaps we should, look at our philosophy. Are we doing something that is, are we venturing into services that we can't afford to do? Are we starting to go down a road that we're not going to be able to sustain in the long run? Or we're doing services perhaps that we need 20% greater population to support for what we're providing. And then when we get 20% greater population, we've established a level of service that we'd need another 40% population to support that level of population. And I'm talking like an arch conservative, but please believe me, I'm the guy who wants to provide those services. I'm on the other end of that spectrum. I want to provide really, really good services, but I want to be able to pay for them, and I want to be able to pay for excellent law enforcement. So let's talk about the philosophy of what we want to do. We want to have a safe jail. We want to have safe communities provided by excellent trained law enforcement who give people confidence. And then we want to have excellent health and human services who help treat people. I had a friend drink himself to death after he got out of jail last week. He was in for 30 days. And he went home, and instead of going to treatment like he promised, he drank himself to death. All right, I'm close to this. But I'm asking this question: are we providing services that we can't afford to provide? Do we need a day, should we cut it back? And that's something that we should look at really hard. And I don't mean to be offensive to you, ma'am, you're new here, all right? But when I was looking at this transition from CJCC to Justice Support Services, I honestly was listening to every conversation I could, and I couldn't see that this was going to cost us a bunch more, and now it's costing us a bunch more. So should we have a conversation about that? And I think we should, because it's budget time and this is costing us money. It's appropriate. So I'd love to hear supervisors weigh in on that thought.
Supervisor Tomczyk.
I would agree with Dan. If we're having such a limited ability to provide the services and don't have the services yet in place to then do that, we may need to look to other ways of achieving the same goal, whether that's through bond conditions saying obtain an AODA assessment before whatever date or something. But if we're looking to the needs of the county, we can't leave law enforcement hanging. Our deaths aren't going to decrease. We don't have unlimited capacity for obtaining funds. So if we're making the hard decisions, that would be one of the things to most likely look at, because it's not statutorily required service. We do want to do what's best for our citizens, but at the same time, it's better to do something that's going to be something full and complete rather than trying to piecemeal it together with the limited funds that we'd be able to have. And then maybe it would be more useful to take those funds and put them to the places that are otherwise requesting them.
Can I interject just a little bit?
Why don't you let me do with this?
Okay.
So, the day report center, not every county has a day report center. When you get up to counties our size, Eau Claire size, you tend to see them more. The day report center absolutely makes the public safer, though. It is a lower cost option rather than having them sit in jail. Having them out is a lower cost total for the county. So I know when we look at the cost here, you see the expenses of staffing the day report center. You eliminate that, the public's not as safe. If they're gonna let them out on bond and there's no monitoring going on, the public's less safe. And if you set them in jail, the costs go significantly higher. We're gonna be back looking for a jail expansion within a couple of years then, if these people are all sitting in jail rather than being out on bond. So you kind of have to also look at the bigger picture when you're looking at the immediate costs.
Absolutely, Judge.
There's a portion of testing we haven't talked about. We've been talking about pretrial testing. There's also a significant portion of testing that needs to happen in diversion. It's dozens of people that if, for example, somebody is charged with possession of meth, a felony, and we regularly, particularly if it's a first-time offense, work with the district attorney and the public defender to achieve a result where they might be on a diversion agreement for a period of a year or two, and during that time they're being tested and monitored to determine whether or not they're maintaining their sobriety and other conditions of the agreement. Judges enter into these agreements, we're all in it together, because we have a belief that we don't need to go forward with the felony charge and the penalties associated with that because we've got safeguards for the community. If we don't have testing, then judges are going to be less likely to enter into those agreements. Felonies will increase. Most of those kind of felonies wind up in the county jail. If they're first or second time meth possession, they could go to prison, but generally they often end up in the county jail. So you're going to see this have other effects. I just want that understood as well. And understand that the present situation in the jail is that most people that are eligible for Huber that are on a sentence are being released from the jail and going to home monitoring. And that requires testing somehow to make sure that people who are supposed to be serving a sentence that I handed down for, say, 6 months in the county jail, they're actually going home, okay? Many of them. That's the plan going forward, and I understand why the sheriff has needed to do that, but understand that if we're actually sending people out of jail home on a GPS and aren't actually testing them to determine compliance with sobriety, there's a lot of moving parts to testing, and I just wanted the totality to be understood as well. And that doesn't even count treatment court. We have to test treatment court. We can't have a treatment court without testing. It literally is not possible. So that's my take on this.
Ask the county administrator, have you just about completed your formal report?
2 minutes left on the rest of the budget, so.
Sure. Dan, all I was going to say was yeah, go, Supervisor Hanson.
I wanted to thank you for that. It's always good to discuss your values, and I appreciate being recentered with that.
I know the administrator is looking for guidance on the budget. As he's explained today, this has got a lot of moving pieces with a lot of ramifications, both at the present and the future. There's a lot of stuff for us to consider. I alluded earlier in comments I'd made that maybe we need to think about this, ask additional questions of the administrator, and perhaps reconvene in plenty of time for him to consider such guidance as we might give him when we've had more time to digest all the information and options that he's presented to us and ask sufficient questions to all the parties that are affected by the recommendations. So I don't want to cut Ken off. You say you have 2 more minutes, Ken? But at the end of that, I was going to ask the committee what your thoughts were on that, if you agree with that, if we should potentially find a time in mid-September that's acceptable to reconvene and provide the guidance that the administrators asked for.
Last couple items on the budget here. So we're still in corrections. The other big increase you're going to see in corrections is a $100,000 increase in the jail meal contract. We had switched meal contractors about 2 years ago. They've really been performing inadequately, so they're looking at a different vendor, but that new vendor is higher cost, significantly higher cost. It's actually back to what it was prior to this last switch. Then we get into emergency management, and then after that, emergency communications. You're going to see very little change on those budgets. I really don't have anything to point out. Janet Smith has been doing a great job managing Captain Standard, so there's really very little that has changed within these 2 cost centers. They're both of them are very close to the prior years, so. And that wraps up the budget presentation. So, like I said, 90% of my budget decisions are all the things that we just talked about. I cannot afford to do all of these items. So I really need some input of where you think the priorities are, so that we can make a couple of tough decisions, because somebody's not going to be happy with the decisions that are made at the end of the day. I can guarantee you that.
Ken, Supervisor Hanson was just asking, basically, could you review what you said in your introduction about the macro picture of the budget, how much needs to be cut, how many positions we're talking about, and just kind of capsulize what we've spoken about the last half hour?
Yep. And when we talk about timing, if you're going to have a special meeting, I really need it in the next week or 2. I need it before the middle of September, because I have to make these final decisions at that point. I have to then assemble the entire budget, print it, and get it ready for a committee of the whole, usually sometime in fairly early October. So we're looking at something in the short term, not the long term. So when we're looking at the budget, so we have a number of positions that have been requested. So I'm trying to determine, are any of them important enough to the rise to the level that I need to work them in? And if I do work them in, if I add a clerk of courts position, where else am I going to make a cut in the budget to accommodate that? So every give has a take. Justice services, staff in the DRC, there's clearly a shift that has to happen there. And I'm looking at that shift. What I have penciled in right now is eliminating 3 correctional deputy positions to convert those to 3 civilian positions operating the DRC. We have added 3 correction positions in the last 5 years. So there's a direct give and take of why I'm doing that. We have, though, also expanded the jail within that 5 years, and they have additional staffing requirements because of that additional wing that they have. So there's a give and a take there, and when I solve one problem, I know I'm creating another problem for a different department. There's the sheriff's department, really the wage and benefit costs within the sheriff's department. It's a huge number. It's like $7 million for that. So that, though, has a huge impact on what I do with union contract and new patrol positions there. Any guidance, any ideas that you have on that, if that's a priority or not? Because if we try to or want to stay competitive in the marketplace, there is a huge cost shift that has to happen for the union contract settlement. And now's the time that I need to know that, because we're in the middle of negotiations and in the middle of putting this budget together. So I need to know if that's where my costs are going to go.
Ken, and most other county employees, other than the sheriff's department, would be given their increases based on the McGrath scale?
Correct.
And what would that be this year? What's the average county employee going to receive as an increase this year?
Yep, 2% is the average. So the McGrath scale is broken into 3 sections, 2.5%, 2% and 1.5% increases. So it depends on the higher you are on the scale, the lower the percentage increase is. On average, though, that $700,000 equals about 2% of the labor budget. So about 2% is the average increase. So the Sheriff's Department union contract is set up with a much shorter scale. You max out that scale in 6 years. There are step increases, and they're not all even, but there's a percentage increase from year to year. And then also, what we're negotiating really is the COLA adjustment to that scale. And that COLA adjustment is the only increase a deputy receives if they've been here for 6 years or more, because they've maxed out the scale at that point. So they're receiving no increase unless we do a COLA adjustment to their scale. Whereas on the McGrath grid, we have 3 to 5 people that are maxed out on that grid because it has 19 steps.
Supervisor Hanson?
All right, in terms of horse trading, and that's what you want to hear? Bob, we could do it 2 ways here. I'm suggesting maybe we take a little break, because I want to go down the hall, and then come back and do some horse trading, talk about this budget and how it's going to land. And I think we owe it to the administrator to get it done today, because he really does want numbers for his work, and it's a complicated job.
I'll get to that to Supervisor Tomczyk.
Otherwise, alternatively, I would recommend, since we did have a plan to attend next Tuesday and then it got bumped to Thursday, if everybody's already available on Tuesday, then we can consider then.
First of all, we'll take the break that Supervisor Hanson requested. Secondly, I think I just heard Supervisor Hanson agree with the recommendation of Supervisor Tomczyk, and we can work on that immediately after the break. I was going to say, for those other folks who are about to talk, Judge Nordstrom, was there any other report you needed to give on circuit courts, or did we pretty much cover that?
I think you've got enough.
And the same thing for the clerk of court? Is that sufficient for what our earlier discussion?
She has a little more.
I have a little more, yes. It won't take long.
If
Take a break.
it was really short, I wanted to let you be able to go if you needed to go. That was my point. No. Okay. Well, why don't we take a break at this point? We'll reconvene in 5 minutes. We had discussion just a moment ago of reconvening on the 7th of September at 5 p.m., suggested by Supervisor Tomczyk. I think everybody's in agreement on that. So we will reconvene at 5 o'clock on the 7th of September in this room, and the only topic will be the budget for the areas covered by this committee. Does that reflect the feeling of the group? That's okay for public notice? It's okay for public notice, yes. And we are not going to request anybody but the county administrator for that meeting in terms of the various people that are affected. However, everybody, of course, is invited to attend if you'd like to attend, but we're not going to request that. So for your personal schedules, you don't have to put this on there as a must attend, because that won't be required for sure, but you're welcome to attend if you'd like to. Okay, with that, I'd also like to announce, Robbie Croix, our transportation chief, has been patiently waiting for the last hour to make really an excellent presentation. But I talked to Robbie, and given the time that we've gone through, Robbie's agreed to come back next month and make his presentation. So Robbie, unless there's a chorus of indignation over what I just said, you're excused to go, and we'll look forward to hearing from you in October. Thank you so much. So at this point on the agenda, we'll go to the Circuit Court update and Judge Nordstrom.
Unless there's any questions, I think we've talked about all the main issues that the court faces, and so I just will be interested in finding out how the budget process comes to a conclusion. I will say this, and I think I'm now speaking, if Judge Needham was here, he's in actually judicial education today with Judge Black, but if he were here, one thing he would want to pass on is the view of the judges is that we can't, within limits, we can't really triage testing. In other words, we've been doing that since May. We've had, pre-COVID, we had many more people being tested than the 140 we had in May when Judge Needham issued a general order across, based on the recommendations from the Day Report Center staff at that time about who ought to be taken off of testing entirely and who should be suspended. And so that dramatically reduced us down. Some of those people have timed out on the system, they've been sentenced and otherwise, and so we're down to 25 people we're testing now. In the long term, the judges aren't really comfortable in picking and choosing who we test. We have, obviously there's similarly situated defendants that we generally need to treat fairly similarly. And that's a judgment call. And it's being done in 4 separate branches, so that's challenging. But at the same time, we sort of had an understanding of who we would test and how long we might test them to try to bring them down, though that process of trying to reduce testing was difficult sometimes because we can't advocate for testing changes particularly. We can sort of generally advise that it would be good if the district attorney's office or the public defender or the defense lawyer suggested a reduction after 60 days of successful testing, but we don't really keep track of such things. And it wasn't happening, and I think the administrators talked about how that might be beneficial to the testing program overall, and the judges all agree. But understand that, and this goes to, I think, what Supervisor Hanson was getting to, and that is we either need to test at a reasonable level that allows us to order testing for those that we think need it within reason, or we shouldn't test at all pre-trial. Because otherwise we're picking winners and losers, so to speak. And that's not something judges should be doing when it comes to pretrial services. And it's particularly difficult when we have limited resources, as I said, to identify who is the most needy of those testing obligations. And so that's the challenge going forward. And I just wanted to pass that on. I know Judge Needham has talked about that with the administrators. It's not a big secret. I think we probably talked about it to some degree at the last public safety meeting when we had our discussion on that. So that would be my only comment today, and I think it's relevant to what you're doing here. So with that, I appreciate the time.
And I would just pick up on one thing you mentioned, and I think Supervisor Tomczyk mentioned it in terms of what's mandatory and what's discretionary. And I know that during the COVID crisis, everybody was doing things in a different way. The judges very efficiently, in many ways, do new things they were doing with electronics that sped you up by 1 or 2 or 3 years in the anticipated route you would progress in. And we can't do away with some things, but we should be wide open to efficiencies, new ways of doing business, looking hard at what's mandatory, what's discretionary, and that might, given our budget crunch, have a big impact on us. And I think this committee, at least in your areas, would be very receptive about hearing the things that you folks think you need to do. that would make you more efficient, or things you just can't do anymore. I mean, we'd love to be on the cutting edge of progressive issues like that. I'm going to turn to our clerk of court.
Good morning and thank you. I did want to touch on a few things that have been going on in our department. Mostly right now, employee retention. I know I asked for 2 new positions. Those positions were asked for before I lost 4 people in a month and a half. So that's 1/3 of my staff that have sought out other employment. 2 of them were long-term employees that went to other counties for different reasons, and the other 2 were more short-term, but still vital parts of our team that left. So that left us with a huge hole right now. I've only been able to hire so far 1 person, and I've had minimal applicants for the positions. In fact, I've had multiple, sorry, things like accepting jobs from other places. Our wages couldn't compete. A few people didn't show up for their interviews. So I've only hired 1 person. I have had no new applicants. All right, as of before yesterday, I had no new applicants for a month and a half. Not even applications to look at. Yesterday I did get 1 more. I have potentially a second one to review. But it's been very difficult and very stressful on my existing staff and myself. I mean, I'm not going to lie, to not have any applicants. I reached out to other counties who also had lost employees, and they were getting, 20 to 40 applicants. I was getting 8 or 5 or 2, and that was all I was getting. I have worked with HR a little bit to try to get more sites are open postings to other sites. Again, it hasn't really been very successful. So that's one thing that we've been struggling with. We need to have enough staff to do the work. Our overtime budget is now increasing and will continue to increase. We are offering, employees to work remotely from home after hours. Many of my employees have children and they have daycare issues, so they can't be here, come in early or stay late, so we've allowed them to work remotely off hours, doing everything we can to think of to try to lessen the burden. But as our caseloads keep going up, all of our departments are intertwined. So whenever there's increases with the sheriff's department in child support, that affects us as well. Again, so we're doing the best we can. What else do I want to say? Oh, the other piece of the puzzle for my staff is compression within our wage grid. The majority of my staff, 9 employees total, are in either step 4 or step 5. Market is 6. My employees range in years of service from 3 to 8. Some of them are more than that. Obviously, those are above step 5, but the majority are between 3 and 8, but still they're stuck in step 4 or step 5. That hurts me, I feel, as far as hiring, because I can't offer a person off the street who has no experience, who has not worked in the courts, directly does not understand our software, to hire them higher than what my employees who have been there, 3+ years, who have, learned the job, know their job, to hire them, someone coming in new, higher than what they're making. So I'm trying to work out that potential problem as well. I've already spoken about my 2 new position requests. Like I said, those were before my multiple resignations. And if you have any more questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Supervisor
I don't always have to go first. If one of you guys want to go first, I don't have to jump on it that quick, but. You go first. Okay. So that entire monologue led me to ask this question, and thank you for sharing. Would we be in a better position to pay people more instead of continuing to add positions? in some cases, and I'm asking the administrator. For retention purposes.
Yeah, I mean, for retention purposes, yes, but it's about workload. So paying someone more doesn't mean they produce any more work. It helps with retention and it retains the skill set, the knowledge, but they're still overworked.
I'd like to counter with, continue a conversation, kind of. I would say that paying somebody more would help with their satisfaction. If somebody's more satisfied with their job, then they may be more productive. That's another way of looking at that. And perhaps it might be worth a consideration. You have more experience, a lot more experience in managing a government than I do, but I have a lot of county employees in my family and listen to what they have to say about it.
Any other questions? Thank you, Christy, for that. Appreciate it. Appreciate all your staff does, and I understand that connection between all the different offices. And as we've all heard today, there's a lot of needs in the justice services, broadly speaking, area. Thank you.
Point out for the record, none of the family members who I said I have worked for counties are working for this county, just for the record.
Okay, we'll turn to the Justice Support Services update with Susan Caparelli. She has had an enormous task in the last couple of months, and we look forward to hearing from you, Susan.
Well, I don't know how much more I can say, and we're running out of time, but obviously I was hired for a completely different position, and we've kind of hit the ground running, and Shelby Hilden has been an excellent transition of a limited term employee. That job has been posted, and I think it's closed. I'm not entirely certain. But we will be putting that as a full-time position with applicants and therein. Tina Sitz has been transferred from the Compass Assessor / Treatment Court caseworker into the DRC operations as the lead Compass Assessor and pretrial case manager. So that position is down there. It's more of a half position, but she's going to lead the county in any of the Compass and pretrial kind of assessing and cross-train anybody that comes in. Our focus too has been, obviously, Judge has talked about the UAs and the multiple quantities of them. I did put together a contract with Premier Biotech. We now have a lab person entity with two different kind of shifts, if you will, in the day to try and support the treatment court, all the pretrial and that morning group, and more of the after the intake court and that sort of thing in the latter afternoon. So that position started last week, I think. And it's going pretty well, some training and some fidelity and some things like that, but it's a work in progress, so I'm happy to report that that's going well. Our Justice Point contracted worker that was in there is no longer here. That contract had ended August 31st, so that has obviously impacted our staffing, but Shelby's doing a great job. We had a lot of things already in place and working with that contracted worker to transition our processes to facilitate that change. So we're fully capable of doing testing now, we're fully capable of doing electronic monitoring, and we're working on our case management, Tyler case management system, transferring all of that information over to the civilian run operations so that we can give the judiciary some more clarity on who we're testing, who we have for case management and that sort of thing. So we're getting there. Another part to my job is obviously the CJCC and that coordination. In 2 months, we haven't had many meetings, but we did have a meeting of the Criminal Justice Subcommittee, and Judge Waterman actually transitioned as the lead for that committee. So, and I think we had a good meeting. I think we decided in that meeting that I'm a doer. So Judge Needham obviously indicated that he would like to see these CJCC subcommittees and the CJCC as a whole to be more of a working and doing, a less than meeting, right? And I am a doer. And I think that Criminal Justice Subcommittee is obviously the greatest vessel for our work in pretrial services. What does the DRC, the transition, in my mind, philosophically alter to less of a DRC and more of a justice support center? And so how do we want to transition and operate as a whole county system? And how do we want to address folks more in the beginning stages and get them the care and help they need? And, rather than those costs in the jail and those sorts of things. So that is the committee that we will be working on these aspects and the alteration therein. Beyond that, treatment court is also under our umbrella, and I think Judge Nordstrand has transitioned with that from Judge Waterman prior, and we're moving ever forward. So that's really all I have to say.
And I will just note that I'm also on the Criminal Justice Subcommittee, so I work with Susan on that and Judge Waterman, and we'll look forward to bringing issues and ideas back to the full committee here. Any questions for Justice Services Support? Thank you. Hearing none, we'll go to the sheriff.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just briefly go over an overview. Jail activity for August. We ended the month, we started the month with a population on the 2nd at 104. We ended the month at 75. So our average daily population for the month of August was 79. A couple things played into that. One, we had, as the DOC opens up more, we had 12 that were finally transported to prison. But also some of the decrease in those numbers was those being put out on electronic monitoring for Huber are no longer in the facility on Huber. So that impacts our average daily count within the facility. We had 189 total number of inmates booked in the month of August as well. And then we talk about court services, we talk about transports, and one of the statutory duties is tending to the courts for the sheriff, so a lot of the transports to and from the building fall to the sheriff's office. Through August 25th, we had 224 transports. 188 of those were done by deputies. We do have a contracted transport service for some of our prison runs, some of our extraditions from out of state that I was just looking through. I think our farthest away was Virginia. There might have been a Florida one this year as well that I didn't quite see in there, but I remember. So we utilize that transport services opposed to sending deputies. So 36 were by the transport service. We're also starting to get into another company that is also open to doing transports for mental health transports. So when we talk about a deputy sitting at the hospital for 12 hours, there's now an opportunity that we can use this contracted company. Now, of course, that's with a lot of factors in there. The person has to be compliant. The person if they're violent or acting out, we got a deputy there. But if they're the person that self-presents or, yep, I need some help, and is going through that process, this group can come and at least stand by and then do the transport from the hospital there. We've utilized them once or twice so far, and it is a huge relief, not only for placing a deputy there, but freeing up that deputy to go back out and answer calls and assist on the street. So that's something that we're really looking at utilizing here as we move forward.
Sheriff, it may be slightly unfair to ask this question of you, but I know there's been a lot of discussion by particularly the representatives and state senators from the Eau Claire area generally about that issue and beds in this area and transport and revising Wisconsin state laws and that. I don't expect you to know exactly what's happening there, but would you have any general perception of if the legislature is going to be providing some kind of relief in this area in the and I'd say the next year or so that might be helpful?
I don't know. I wish there was more of a timetable or at least more discussions that, and maybe they're out there, I haven't been a part of them or it's been relayed to me, but,
Fair enough.
and just one other quick number. So the deputies, for their transports, we've put on thus far this year, 25,700 miles through August 25th. So that's just been in transports alone with our deputies. That doesn't count, ready transport. That's all I have for a quick update for you folks.
Are there any other questions of the sheriff? If there aren't, thank you, Sheriff. And we'll move on to the medical examiner.
Thank you and good morning. So from the medical examiner's office, as stated earlier, everything is increasing. We are up 12% in our total cases. We've now increased our scene responses up to 2%. Our death certificates are up 8%. Autopsies are up 43%, which is really a big number. And cremation permits are up 11%. Our activity right now, we have 10 pending death certificates, 11 suicides, 1 undetermined, and 13 accidental deaths. We had 2 suicides last month, in the month of August, both of which were veterans, which was very emotionally draining, not only on my staff and myself, but also veteran services, law enforcement. Dealing with families at the scenes can be very difficult. And as we were chatting, one of our families of suicide from last year had called and requested information. With suicide, it is ongoing. We are serving these families for years with answers that they are looking for in the work that we do. While we were sitting here in this meeting, we had 3 registrations for hospice, a Minnesota cremation request. So we're constantly working while things are going on. We have 121 people registered for hospice, and of those, 93 are actively dying as we speak. So this here is above and beyond unexpected natural and unexpected deaths. So this brings me into the CT project. Jim and I had a walkthrough last week. The company came and looked at our building and where the CT scanner would go and how we would adapt. We're waiting for cost. And, but with the 43% increase in autopsies, seriously, this will be a cost saver for everyone engaged, especially when we're talking about manner. And that's what we're doing. We're ruling out, is it a homicide? We're ruling out these things that we don't need to do autopsies for, but we can base our decisions on science and toxicology. This is going to be a huge asset for the county, and St. Croix County will actually be able to start doing regional work, and it could be a really big thing here in the county to start generating revenue. So 21st century forensics is here, and this here machine is really going to be a great asset. I spoke with Health Partners and the ER docs last week, and they are ready to jump on board and do some collaborative work, and that would be both in St. Croix County and Polk County as far as prevention and the cause and manner piece of this. So I'm pretty excited about it. I'm excited to see what the building's going to look like and what those costs are. And if it's cost prohibitive, then as the elected officials, we're going to have to be prepared for a ongoing increase in autopsies, and also the potential that we might not be able to do autopsies as frequently as we do now. Non-trauma is going to be the part that's really hard for us, and pretty much all forensic pathologists are ruling out non-trauma, which means that is going to be really difficult in cause and manner. And for us, 100% of our folks who are autopsied are cremated. So the cremation piece to this is huge, and we have an 80% cremation rate. So we need to really look at that as to how we can best serve the county and really have the best scientific answers available to families when determining cause and manner prior to cremation.
Patty, could either you remind us or the administrator, going just back to cost, where do we sit on that?
Okay.
I'll take that. So we have $120,000 budgeted for building renovations necessary for the Lodox machine. And then we had $250,000 net for the Lodox machine. So this would be a scope change. This will require a budget amendment. We're just waiting to get the final cost in to see if it falls within those parameters. So we know whether we're just changing the scope or if we need to change the dollar amount also. But those are approved dollar amounts within the KIP. 370,000 is what we're working with.
And I seem to recall that Patty mentioned that the price had actually dramatically dropped from what proposals had been a year ago as a result of different type of equipment that was being solicited, and that might drive down the cost of both the equipment and the relevant building renovations, or it could. But is that roughly where we sit?
All I can comment on is the machine. That's all I know about it. And that the Lodox is a brand, and we're now, this here is a CAT scan refurbished, and that there is far less expensive.
Yeah, that's where we come in with the change of scope. But yes, this machine, because it's a different machine, it's not a Lodox machine, it's a CT scanner, a refurbished CT scanner, does have a lower cost to it, which would fall within that 250.
Any other questions for the medical examiner? Hearing none, we'll move to the next items or request. Yep.
So we're talking about mental health and with regard to the medical examiner and the veterans services. What are we talking about as far as actions? Is there, and I know this kind of steps outside of, in a way, the parameters of this meeting and maybe even this agenda, but 2 veterans suicides in the scope of less than 2 weeks is a lot. And I with the end of the war in Afghanistan, we might see more because it was a terrible time for young veterans. Anything going on?
So I forgot to mention, you see the yellow bracelets in front of you. Those are suicide prevention. I have some for all the board members. It's suicide, September is Suicide Prevention Month. That's, knowing that we promote that is really important. I did have bring over the bracelets to Veteran Services and also 50 gun locks for Veteran Services to hand out. I'm hoping that we can do some sort of stuff, even promotion, I don't know if promotion is the right word, but just awareness pieces on the county website. People, we just need to talk about it. It's just, and if we can prevent suicide, that means there's more work for the sheriff. And there's more work for Health and Human Services. But ultimately, prevention should be what we're working on. So you all, as elected officials, by wearing that bracelet is really important, and just talking to the power of reaching out and asking for help. That is, it's okay, and that we have the services to help you is probably the biggest thing that we can do. The alternative is that all our staff is going to be burnt out, because it is very emotionally draining for everyone, whether it's the, whatever department we are. We're the same people seeing the same things over and over and over again.
Just generally, I think I can say on behalf of everybody on the committee that we really appreciate everybody who's been here today. You all play an extraordinarily vital role in the making this such a wonderful county that it is. And most people don't understand the exceptional stresses that some offices are placed in, and we really do appreciate what everybody does across the spectrum in this public safety area. With that, I'm going to turn to requests for future agenda items. I do have one comment. At our last meeting, we had a discussion about drug abuse in the county and the fact that this committee should probably bring up and discuss that issue at an appropriate time. I did not place it on the agenda for September because we obviously had an extraordinarily busy agenda. But I would suggest that we, and one of our members is missing who has great interest in that, I would suggest that we might shoot for November for a discussion on that. And if nothing else comes up, we might want to focus on that. But there's a lot of other options. There's a lot of work that we need to do to have a meaningful discussion about the drug issue. And so I would just suggest that we think about that and communicate always legally with either myself or others with your suggestions as to what topics we should raise, who should be in to speak about it. For example, we have I'm going to call it a drug abuse subcommittee of CJCC. We have the criminal subcommittee of CJCC. We have everybody here at the table could comment in some way on it. But, and we also might want to engage in some way with the Health and Human Services Committee, either with a representative joining us or with a joint meeting. So I think we have a lot to discuss about how we want to proceed on that, and I would just leave it that we maybe just let's communicate with one another and try to bring that to a head sometime soon. Maybe we could talk about it a bit on September 7th or 9th when we're together, and then make a decision as to how we proceed to have that discussion as a future agenda item, if that's okay with everybody. So hearing nothing else, we have announcements and correspondence. I know we have several. It's Sheriff.
I'm going to ask that Natasha Cardinal, St. Croix County Emergency Management, come up and make an announcement for the month of September.
Welcome, Natasha.
Good morning. Just quick announcement, September is National Preparedness Month. This month, Ready Wisconsin, which is a site that focuses on preparedness and emergency, along with St. Croix County Emergency Management, is encouraging our employees and our public to get involved during the month and ensure that they have tools needed to prepare for disasters and emergencies. We're equipping folks with skills and resources to remain safe. And Wisconsin's theme this year is called Prepare to Protect. A few of us in the last month worked out of the Sheriff's Office, worked on promoting National Preparedness Month and what we want to do. And we used medical reserve funds to purchase about 40 emergency preparedness kits, so big backpacks for your home, car kits, and then some for your pets. And what we're going to be doing is offering employees and the public a chance to win some of these kits over the next 5 weeks. We have posts on the bridge for the employees and quizzes for them to participate in to win them, and we also are doing an update each week on the Sheriff's Facebook page for the public, and they'll have quizzes for the public to participate in to win these bags. So let your staff know, and all information is out on the bridge and on our emergency management webpage.
Thank you, Natasha, for that. So September is National Preparedness Month. It is. Great. Will there be a formal resolution to that respect that you'd like the board to look at, or is that something that okay, great, thanks. Any other announcements, correspondence? Janet, anything else? Nothing? Okay, with that, it's now 9:52, and our next meeting would be September 7th at 5 p.m. And thank you, everybody, for coming, and we're adjourned.